Thanks for joining us. Here's a quick checklist of what corporate India is expecting from the Finance Minister in Budget 2017. First, push up demand. Corporate India expects the Finance Minister to announce measures that can prop up demand and offset the negative impact of demonetization in the short run. Secondly, create jobs. Captains of Indian industry expect the Finance Minister to announce measures that can create an enabling environment and reduce the effective cost of creating good quality jobs in the private sector. Thirdly, revive investments. India Inc. also expects this budget to enhance capital expenditure and encourage the private sector to start spending. Fourth, reducing corporate tax and withdrawal of all incentives. The Confederation of Indian Industry, or the CII, is expecting the corporate tax to be brought down to 18%, including all surcharge and cess from the current effective rate of 19.8%. Lastly, encouraging investments in research and development and innovation. These measures, India Inc. believe, will make India a more attractive investment destination. To take this conversation a little further, I'm joined by the President of CII, Naushad Forbes. Also joining us, Sumant, Sinha, Chairman and CEO of Renew Power. Gentlemen, many thanks indeed for joining us. Sumant, I'm going to start this conversation by asking you about, this is Arun Jaitley's fourth budget. What do you think should be his key priorities?
Yeah, Harsha, I think that every budget has its own significance. As did the first one, this one of course has a special significance because it's coming in after a fairly significant event, i.e. demonetization, and its potentially negative impacts on the economy in the short term. I think clearly the issues are that industrial growth somehow is not reviving, and therefore manufacturing continues to not do well. So I think that is certainly an area where the government needs to find some way of stimulating new investments. And I think new investments would only come in if there is demand. I think there is demand missing in the economy. And there was a hope that once agricultural growth happens, which we had a good monsoon last year, that would lead to a revival in demand. But somehow that hasn't really panned out as expected. So I think one of the most important things the finance minister needs to focus on is how to revive demand in the Indian economy. And I think when you couple that with demonetization, where also there was a demand hit, I think it sort of leads again to the fact that demand has to be kickstarted. And I think one way of doing that is the finance minister potentially has to relax a little bit on the fiscal deficit side and maybe spend some money or cause public sector companies to start spending more money and thereby at least create some demand in the Indian economy.
Naushad, do you believe the government will give a demand push to the economy? Many people are expecting a stimulus or even a cash transfer. Is that on your list of expectations?
So, I'm not sure what form the fiscal stimulus should take. The form that I hope it doesn't take, by the way, is a reduction in tax rates, because I think that's a very expensive way of actually trying to stimulate demand. And I'm not sure how much of an effect it actually has. So if, for example, just to give you an example, if one reduces taxes on a particular item by 10%, right, which is a very major reduction, will that actually lead to a great increase in the consumption of that item? I'm not so sure, right? And it's a very expensive thing to do from a budgetary perspective. What I'd like to see to a much greater extent is the government using this as an opportunity to reduce taxes and reduce exemptions at the same time, both for the corporate sector and at the personal income tax level, as a way of simultaneously reforming the tax system and also stimulating spending power in the hands of companies and individuals.
Let's talk about growth, Sumant. Do you expect this government to be announcing measures that can stimulate consumption? Is a fiscal stimulus on the cards?
Well, there are two ways in which the finance minister can give some sort of a fiscal stimulus. I think one is through faster spending on the part of the government in infrastructure programs or encouraging infrastructure investments. The second way is the way that you described, which is actually to put more money in people's pockets. And my general sense is that even though inflation has come down right now, I think there is perhaps more merit in creating demand more on the capacity creation side than on the consumption side. Because I think consumption side can very quickly lead to inflation, and then you'll have again higher interest rates happening, which none of us really want. So I think maybe some stimulus spending which creates more capacity perhaps is better at this point than it is to just put money into people's pockets. I think maybe the finance minister from a political standpoint goes for a mix of the two. That is eminently possible, but in theory or in principle, I certainly believe that there needs to be some stimulus to the economy right now.
Sumant, a word about the budget deficit. India needs to bring down its budget deficit to about 3% of GDP in the next financial year. Do you believe it could compromise or delay the process of fiscal consolidation?
No, there is no right time to go weak on your fiscal deficit targets. I think at any point in time, fiscal prudence and discipline is perhaps the most important thing, because ultimately it has fairly significant macroeconomic spin-offs and impacts. So I think fiscal deficit is something that the finance minister has to keep under some degree of control. So I certainly don't recommend that it go higher than the 3.5% it was earlier, but maybe there's merit to it not going down to 3% either, and maybe keeping it somewhere in between or something, and thereby giving at least some fiscal room to demand and to stimulus creation.
Naushad, do you believe that the government could stray away from the path of fiscal consolidation?
I hope they will stay on the path of fiscal consolidation. I hope that they would stick to the target of 3% and go for that target of 3%, and avoid straying away from that. At the end of the day, the best way of ensuring long-term growth for us as an economy is to ensure that we keep our fundamentals solid, and keeping our fundamentals solid includes fiscal consolidation, includes meeting our fiscal deficit targets, and if we need to spend more on infrastructure, then we should find the resources elsewhere, for example, through disinvestment or privatization.
Naushad, enough has been said about jobless growth and so on, but what do you expect the government to do to create new jobs in the economy?
So first of all, while many use the phrase jobless growth, I don't think it's an accurate phrase. If you look over the last 25 years, the economy, as it's grown rapidly, has actually created millions of jobs. The problem is that our job and employment statistics are focused on the formal sector of the economy, and they do not capture the jobs that are being created in informal services and in contract labor adequately. And as a result, we think that the growth has been actually jobless when it's not been. The problem is not then the creation of jobs, the quantity of jobs being created, but the quality of the jobs that are being created. We've been creating huge numbers of jobs, millions of jobs, but millions of jobs in contract labor, millions of jobs in informal services. These jobs usually have very little of protection for labor, and they provide great flexibility to the employer, and that's why they're being created by the million. On the other hand, if you take the formal sector of the economy, where you have complete protection for labor and almost no flexibility for the employer, we're creating very few jobs. So the problem is the quality of jobs being created. And that's why one of our recommendations for this budget from CII has been that we need to reduce the effective cost of creating good quality jobs. And then what we've suggested is that the government extend one of its own schemes that it launched as a part of the textile and apparel policy last year, which provides for fixed-term employment, and where the government actually meets the employer's provident fund contribution for the first year. And this is a very significant way of creating good quality jobs. And we've recommended that be extended either across the economy, and if that's not possible, then to more and more employment creating sectors, whether it's tourism and hospitality, whether it's the healthcare industry, or whether it's food processing.
Sumant, you've spoken often in the past about private sector investments or the lack of it. What can the government do to revive investments in the private sector?
No, as we discussed earlier, I think there is very limited headroom, but within that limited headroom, the finance minister has to prioritize more spending towards capacity creation. Now, I think with banks getting more liquidity through the demonetization money that is coming in, certainly interest rates have gone down, inflation is going down. That itself will lead to more liquidity in the hands of banks, and therefore a decline in interest rates. And that decline in interest rates, I think, Harsha, over a period of time, will be the biggest impactor on new investments as well as new consumption demand. So I think we have to give this a little bit more time to play itself through. And once we start seeing interest rates down to 8, 9, 7%, you'll just start seeing the economy kick up into a higher gear. So let's be a little bit patient. I think we're heading in the right direction. And I think the finance minister has to keep a focus on making sure that inflation stays down. I think the one other thing I would add to that is that part of the reason we still have a very inefficient or a friction-oriented investment environment is because of the way our entire sort of bureaucracy is structured. Whether it's on the tax administration side, whether it's governance at the local level side, I think there are still way too many friction areas in the government, which the government has to look at institutional reform to address. Because if you don't do that, you'll always have such a high drag in the system that it's always going to be curtailing growth and more investments in the economy.
Naushad, Forbes, at CII, what are you recommending to the government to kickstart the investment cycle?
I'll give you 3 quick examples. First, in terms of disinvestment or privatization, the last 5 budgets have had disinvestment targets, and the last 5 budgets have not met their disinvestment targets. So, we need to set a deadline and say that, look, by December 2017, we will disinvest or privatize 100 companies, 100 public sector units. These 100 public sector units can include the 74 companies that have been identified by Niti Aayog, which was the initiative of the last budget. Right? So that's the first thing we should do. The second thing that we should do is this government had appointed the Kelkar committee to recommend how to address the PPP models that had led to a lot of disputes. And the Kelkar committee has recommended a dispute resolution mechanism. And again, what we've recommended from CI is, look, set up the dispute resolution mechanism, have that board in place such that by December 2017, all pending PPPs that have been stuck now for years are indeed addressed and resolved. And the third recommendation we've made is a new initiative of this government, which is a very welcome initiative, where they've announced that train stations will be developed in PPP mode across the country. And they've identified, I believe, 100 train stations with this intention. We've said, can we, by December 2017, have 50 train stations being redeveloped under PPP mode?
Let's talk about taxes, Sumant. Are you expecting tax rates to be reduced significantly?
I do. I certainly do. I think that the finance minister had already announced in the last budgets a roadmap for bringing the corporate tax rate down from 30% to 25% and removing exemptions and bringing MAT up as well. I think that is therefore likely to happen. Perhaps corporate rates should be brought down faster than his trajectory had indicated, which was 25% over a 5-year time period. Maybe bring it down right now to 25%. I think on the individual tax front as well, certainly given the impact of demonetization and the government's attempt to try to rectify that, they'll probably try to put more money in the hands of people by increasing the exemption limits or by giving a higher deduction limit for interest costs or just decreasing the tax rates. I think some of that definitely is going to happen.
Naushad, you alluded to taxes a little earlier in this conversation. Do you expect corporate taxes to be cut and what have you recommended?
We've recommended from CII that corporate taxes be brought down to 18%. Everyone said, well, look, that's a huge fall, a huge drop in corporate taxes. How do you justify it? And why 18%? Very, very simple answer. If you look at the official tax rate is 34%, right? But including cesses and surcharge. We're recommending 18%, including cesses and surcharge. But if you look at the effective rate of tax is actually under 20%. So we're actually saying that go with an 18% tax rate and remove all surcharges and cesses. And why 18%? Because 18% is the MAT rate. And given that it's the MAT rate that the minimum rate that companies are supposed to pay in any case, right? If you go to an 18% rate, then you can avoid grandfathering of existing incentives and exemptions. We think at a stroke, you can both put in place one of the world's most attractive, competitive corporate tax rates, and at the same time, sweep away all of these exemptions and incentives that complicate our tax code and lead to all manner of tax arbitrage. I mean, the only people who would be unhappy with the proposal that we've made are all the tax accountants and all the big accountancy firms that thrive on complexity in our tax codes.
Gentlemen, we leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. If you have been, thank you so much for watching.